phone that won't snap like a breadstick, a normal-looking phone with a battery large enough to power a small vehicle, or a triple folding phone, even if it does happen to cost you and your entire family's kidneys. But which ones should people buy? Welcome to the heavily revamped Best Smartphones of the Year, starting with the Glow Up Award, the most improved phone from last year. And I'd say there are two, and only two obvious contenders here. So, Samsung's Galaxy Z Fold 7 feels like a massive change, simply because of how much slimmer and lighter it is than the Z Fold 6, while also bumping up pretty much all of its specs at the same time. This one generation is more than the difference in thickness between the last 4 generations of Samsung Folds put together. And then the one that, beginning of this year, I would have predicted to be the last phone to be sitting in this category, the iPhone. Not the 17 Pro, not the Pro Max, but the base iPhone 17. I distinctly remember casually strolling into the Apple event this year, being totally prepared for there to be like 2 changes max to this phone, like they usually are, only to end up scurrying out of there a couple of hours later when it finished, trying to piece together my entire page of notes. Basically, everything about the phone got better. They took the screen from easily the weakest in its price segment to probably the strongest, and even doubled the base storage of the phone without touching the price. It's enough improvements that ultimately, I'm going to give the Glow Up Award to the iPhone. There's never been such a sudden, obvious best time to upgrade. Now, onto something new this year, the Outside the Box Award, a phone that has some kind of unique trait, but that actually makes it better. So the ultra-thin phones, for example, the iPhone Air, the S25 Edge, they hit the unique part, but I would say they're worse because of it, because they die literally 30% faster than their more traditionally proportioned brethren. More on these later though. What was pretty cool though, is the rear display from the Xiaomi 17 Pro. It feels like the most fully realized second screen experience. The personalization options are vast, and you can even game on the thing. But ultimately, I would say, while it does give you tons of small, useful tools, there are just very few big features that truly change how you use your phone. The minimal phone, though, is a full Android experience, but with this black and white e-ink display that drains much less power and creates less strain on your eyes. But this doesn't win either, because batteries are getting so good this year, even without a display like this, and trying to use your apps while they're refreshing like a slideshow is, well, its own kind of strain. So for me, the smartphone that ended up impressing me the most with its uniqueness is Samsung's Galaxy Z Trifold. I went into my first hands-on thinking it would feel interesting, but gimmicky. I came out searching for what the fastest way is to transfer everything over from my iPhone when the thing releases in the UK. It is thicker and heavier when closed up than a normal foldable, but the reward of this enormous 10-inch display it has on the inside that's widescreen, so content really makes the most of it, for me, finally makes the cost and sacrifices from carrying a foldable actually worth the pain. Okay, I mentioned earlier that 2025 has been the year of normal-looking phones that just seem to have limitless endurance, but which is the best of these unkillable devices? Mind you, that doesn't mean which phone has someone just stuffed the biggest battery cell into. Optimization matters, charging speed matters, and most of all, is this still a phone that I would recommend buying outside of its killer battery? The iPhone 17 Pro Max deserves a mention here. This is the first iPhone to have a 5,000-ish mAh cell. When you combine that with Apple's optimization, it's the first ever mainstream phone that I would say has spectacular battery life, about 10% longer than Samsung's. But then you get to the supersized battery phones, which are a tier above, but there's also something that you need to look out for. That because of EU regulation, there is actually a cap on how large your battery can be before it is classed as a dangerous good. So quite a few phones that have anything over about 5,500 mAh, like the Vivo X300 Pro, which has a 6,510 mAh cell, they actually ship a tweaked version of their phone with a smaller battery to European countries. So if you buy the phone here, you would only get 5,440, which is why this isn't winning the award. The clever thing, though, that some companies have done is 2 cells, 2 separate batteries that each sit under the EU cap, but combine to give you more. It is a little bit less space efficient because you now have to have 2 separate battery casings, but can't complain too hard. It gets you the capacity you want. And it makes your charging faster, too, because it allows the phone to split the load of current and heat between the 2 cells. All of which to say, the real battery champs of 2025 are the phones that have this dual cell design. So that is the Xiaomi 17 Pro Max with a ridiculous 7,500 mAh overall capacity and 100-watt charging. The only caveat is this whole rear second display is a little bit of a contradiction if you're purely optimizing for endurance. Even Realme's flagship phone, the GT8 Pro, has a dual cell, 7,000 mAh capacity with 120-watt charging. You gotta love this year of phones. And then the OnePlus 15 takes that 120-watt charging, pairing it with an even higher capacity of 7,300 mAh. This also might just be the most comfortable that a phone has ever felt in the hands. It's like a baby's bottom. I don't know if that comes across right, to be honest. I'm just not a fan of the camera downgrades that have snuck in here. Compared to the previous OnePlus flagship, every one of these rear camera sensors is smaller, which I'm going to explain why in a bit, but it doesn't bring joy. So the phone that I think wins the Unkillable Battery Award, the phone I would choose to use if battery was the priority, is the Oppo Find X9 Pro. 7,500 mAh, basically as big as you can get. A pretty similar spec sheet and design to the OnePlus 15, but instead of a camera downgrade, this is up. This is way up. The only catch is 80-watt charging instead of the 100 plus that some of these phones can do. But then when you think about the fact that the iPhone is capped at 40 and the Samsung is capped at 45, it doesn't feel like so much of a problem. Now, where I think this gets particularly interesting is when we talk about the Filmmaker's Choice Award. Exactly what it sounds like, it's the best camera, but with one clarification. This award also factors in the camera experience. Does the battery let you shoot for a long time? Is the screen bright enough so you can see outdoors? Is the camera app really polished and intuitive to use? So instead of thinking this is just best photos, best videos, think of it as which phone would I actually want to use to take those photos and videos. So let's get one thing out of the way. It is not the iPhone 17 Pro. It is not the Samsung Galaxy S25 Ultra. We're at a point in the smartphone market where to actually take these cameras to the next level, one must
pay the toll.
Did it work? Is it nice and scary? You'd have to make your camera sensors wider, and then for those wider sensors to work, you'd also have to make them deeper, potentially making your phone top-heavy, cutting into the battery, or God forbid, turning your design into this. So for companies like Apple and Samsung, who are not trying to sell millions, they're trying to sell tens of millions of their flagships, they are going to be very resistant to making changes like this that might feel like a compromise for 90% of people for the benefit of 10%. All of which to say, these guys can let themselves out. Pretty similar story for the Google Pixel 10 Pro. It has the highest number of intelligent camera features, but for someone who really knows what they're doing, you will be able to get more out of phones that have better camera hardware. And it's not quite the Oppo Find X9 Pro, although this is extremely close. It actually has almost identical camera hardware to the actual winner, which is the Vivo X300 Pro. A phone that I would actually say is 2 generations ahead of the already extremely capable mainstream flagships. The thing has a ridiculously bright outdoor display, peaking at 4,500 nits. Its battery, while it's not the very top, is still well enough for a full day of shooting, and the camera itself is special. If you didn't know, Vivo, Oppo, and OnePlus are all owned by the same parent company, BBK. That's why there's so many parallels between their phones. But what's really interesting is this year, it feels like they're really trying to separate who each one is for. I think they've decided that OnePlus is pure performance. That's why the OnePlus 15 gets the fastest chip and huge battery, but scaled back cameras. And they've even scrapped the OnePlus Hasselblad camera partnership that's been going on for years now. It feels like Oppo is the halfway house. It's got most of the performance of OnePlus and most of the camera of Vivo because they want this to be the mainstream all-rounder flagship, and then they want the camera enthusiasts to go to Vivo with its slightly scaled back battery, but the best camera sensors you can find, paired with the most advanced, smoothest damn camera software to ever grace an Android phone. And this specialization is kind of nice because it means that if you are someone who is going to take photos